Christmas at Owl Nest from A Good Investment and Other Stories by G.W. Losey. Published Christian Book and Art Publishing Company, Carl Hirsch A.G., Constance. The Blairs were about to celebrate their first Christmas in their country home, and the prospects for a merry time were not promising. When they lived in the city, the grand old festival was always observed with appropriate and elaborate ceremony. Conditions for commemorating the joyous day as the younger members of the family preferred, however, were not favorable in their present quarters. The unpretentious house nestled among the hills near Yonkers Junction, usually called Owl Nest by the Blairs, was a delightful abode in the summer and autumn, but now that winter had set in, the place seemed intolerably lonely and uninviting to the mother and children. To engineer Horace Blair it was different. To him it was the dearest place on earth, for it was the home of his childhood and youth, endeared by hundreds of hallowed associations. The older he grew, the more tenaciously his heart clung to the old homestead. After the elder Blairs had been called to their reward, and the heirs were arranging to dispose of the property, Horace, the youngest son, determined to purchase it rather than have it pass into the possession of strangers. He never regretted that he did so. The State Central R.R. crossed the valley line at Yonkers Junction, and his runs enabled him to be at home every alternate day. With the assistance of Horace the younger, he had already improved appearances on the farm. The fields, garden, and orchard had yielded bountiful returns, and the engineer farmer hoped to be able to lessen the mortgage considerably in the course of another year. Long before their neighbors were thinking about Christmas, the young Blairs had been consulting the calendar and had found that Papa Blair would be at home on Christmas Eve. And there was no doubt in their minds that Christmas would be the same happy day it had always been in their home. But their hopes were ruthlessly blasted when Mr. Blair informed them 4 days prior to the joyous festival that his partner, Engineer Blakely, was sick, and it would devolve upon him to take out number 9 every day until Blakely was able to resume work. "How can we celebrate Christmas without Papa?" was the oft-repeated question. Owl Nest, dreary enough ordinarily those wintry days, seemed to be the dreariest place on earth with such a prospect in view. The younger Horace, it is true, braced up and concluded to take Papa Blair's place and bring good cheer into the lonely circle, but he was only moderately successful. Mama Blair had gone to Yonkers 2 evenings to see her husband, for the train stopped there, and occasionally was detained several minutes. But the children were not even permitted that diversion. On the 3rd evening, however, which was Christmas Eve, they were permitted to accompany their mamma. Aunt Louise had unexpectedly arrived and announced that she intended spending Christmas at Owl Nest. When the days had been longer, the children frequently paid their father the honor of going to Yonkers and watching number 9 and greeting their engineer Papa. But now that it was nearly dark when the train passed and the weather unusually unfavorable, they seldom had that pleasure. It was considered a huge treat to be permitted to go to the junction that evening, therefore, and especially since they had not seen their Papa for 3 days. How they scampered and romped and raced, scarcely stopping to ask Mama Blair one question all the way. It was a glad-hearted group that stood by the track awaiting the first glimpse of number 9. However, the spirit of glee that pervaded everyone was ruthlessly put to flight when Horace cried, "Oh, Mamma, look what has happened!" The mother gazed up the track and was horrified to see that a huge rock had slid down the hillside and lay in the cut, protruding over the track. "Oh, Papa will be killed!" she screamed. "What shall we do?" The next moment the whistle of number 9 up at Byers Crossing, less than 3 miles distant, was heard. "I'll signal him," said Horace, and started up the track. "Run as fast as you can," shouted the excited woman, but her counsel was not needed. The lad ran as if he had wings or some unearthly power aiding him. He soon passed the rock and sped on without slacking his pace. Number 9 was speeding at a furious clip as she rounded the curve 1 mile distant and appeared in view. A puff of steam was seen, and then the peculiar whistle that the Blairs knew so well rang upon the air, and the train came thundering down the grade. Young Horace seemed like a mere speck to the anxious mother, but she could distantly see how frantically he waved his handkerchief. 2 more puffs of steam were seen, and 2 shrill whistles pierced the evening air, and the ponderous wheels of the huge engine began to grind and groan under the reversal pressure of the brakes, and the train trembled and creaked and slowly yielded to the efforts of the engineer, and came to a standstill within several feet of the obstruction. The conductor and his crew emerged from the train and hastened forward to ascertain the cause of the sudden stop. "How did you happen to see it, Blair?" asked the conductor. "My boy signaled me," said the engineer as he stepped from the cab and greeted his wife and children. "It's mighty lucky we are," said the conductor. "Where's the boy?" One by one the passengers alighted and inquired as to the trouble, the cause of which was soon apparent to all. Engineer Blair rushed up the track and, picking up his almost breathless son, carried him to the front. "Is he hurt?" cried Mrs. Blair. No, just out of wind," said the overjoyed father. Very soon young Horace had sufficiently recovered his breath to assure everyone that he was all right. The passengers crowded about the boy and expressed their appreciation of his service in most extravagant language. A portly gentleman mounted the steps of the cab and said, "Good people, words are cheap. This lad has no doubt saved the lives of some of us, and he and his worthy father deserve our gratitude. I am in favor of showing our appreciation of the service rendered us in a substantial way." Saying this, he placed a $10 bill in his hat and started through the crowd. He soon came back and counted a trifle over $200. He handed it to Mr. Blair, saying, "For you and the boy." "I do not want your money, strangers," Mr. Blair protested. "I have only done my duty and what either of you would have done in my place." "Give it all to the boy, then," the gentleman replied. In the meantime, the crew had busily been working at the boulder and had so far removed it that the train could pass. "All aboard!" shouted the conductor. "A happy Christmas to the engineer and his family," shouted someone. "3 cheers for the engineer and his family," someone else shouted. The cheers were given lustily. Mr. Blair embraced his loved ones and leaped into the cab, and as soon as the last passenger mounted the car steps, the train started forward and soon disappeared. Owl Nest was by no means a dreary place that Christmas Eve. There was not only very much to talk about, but Aunt Louise had been commissioned to take her brother's place, and the Christmas festivities moved off very much as they had in the past, and were both appropriate and interesting. The next day, Mr. Blair surprised his family by arriving home in time for the Christmas dinner. Blakely had recovered, and being with his parents at the other terminus of the road, agreed to bring the train back, and Mr. Blair returned home on the Limited. The Blairs' first Christmas at Owl Nest was a memorable one to all of the family.